Happy Monday, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Transformative Talk with Coach V. Every Monday, I do a little short video before the actual podcast is released, just to kind of give you a preview of what we're talking about in that week's episode. And so this week, we are going to be talking about sacrifice and how we have a perspective on sacrifice, maybe because of the way that we grew up and things that our parents and adults have said to us. It has sometimes kind of a negative connotation to it. And I want us to kind of have a different perspective and look at sacrifice differently and look at sacrifice as something that is a privilege and it's something that we should do joyfully. And this was even a revelation to me. So this was a big learning thing for me, even as I studied for this episode and made notes and really thought about it. We should look at sacrifice as something that is a privilege and we should do it with joy. You know, our children didn't ask to be brought here. And so anything that we sacrifice for them, we do it with joy in our hearts. I think growing up, a lot of times we heard our parents and our grandparents say things, like I sacrifice for you to have a good education or for you to have this. And so it's almost like we feel beholden, to that person, or we feel bad because they sacrificed, or it's something that maybe we are feeling, and sometimes people can make us feel bad because they're angry about it. And so I just want you to have clarity and perspective and really be at peace with it. And from this point forward, really look at sacrifice as joyful, is something that you do joyfully. Like when you give your tithes and offerings at church, we do it joyfully. We give God back what he has given to us. He gave us the jobs that we go to. He gives us the energy and the strength and the endurance to be on these jobs. And so it's without him, we couldn't do it. And so we have to give back to him what he has so graciously and freely given to us. We don't wake ourselves up in the morning. We don't keep ourselves focused on that job. He does that. And so when we get that paycheck, we give God back his 10%, period. So let's talk a little bit about sacrifice. And of course, we know every week we take the transformative thought. I just kind of take that and talk about it for a few minutes. And then at 10, that episode comes out so you can hear the full meat of the podcast. By the way, you can catch the podcast on Anchor, on Spotify, and it is now available on Apple Podcasts. It is Transformative Talk with Coach V. I post it every Monday, so you'll have the links. And I pray that you'll just listen and maybe it'll give you a different perspective and you'll begin to look at things a different way. And I also encourage you that when you do listen to the podcast, that maybe you have a notebook with you that you can make some notes, some things that you can even go back and reflect on just in your private time that can help to begin change that perspective in the way that you look at things. And so the transformative thought for this week is this: the price of my sacrifice is far less than the cost of my disobedience. And so I would much rather make the sacrifice up front, doing what God has called me to do or what he's asking me to do, than to have to pay a higher price later on down the road. And so again, the price of my sacrifice is far less than the cost of my disobedience. My disobedience, me delaying my obedience, me doing it the way that I want to do it, how I want to do it, when I want to do it, is going to cost me at the end. There are going to be penalties and taxes and all these late fees attached to it. Because if I don't do it the way that God has called me to do it, guess what? He's going to bring me right back to it. And I'm going to have to pay an additional price for my disobedience. And so I would far rather do what he asked me to do up front, trusting that he will supply whatever I need, trusting that he knows what's best, that the way that he's asking me to do it has a purpose behind it. And I need to go on and do that Because if I don't do what he asked me to do, if I do it the way that I want to do it, I'm going to have to come back to a point that I'm going to have to atone for that. There's going to be a consequence for that. And it may be a negative consequence. So I don't want to suffer that negative consequence. I want to get it right the first time if I have the opportunity to do that. And so when we look at sacrifice, we need to look at it from a place of, it's a privilege and a joy to sacrifice. That it's something that many don't get to do. We shouldn't look at those things begrudgingly. When we sacrifice, when we think about when we volunteer our time with an organization or a church, we should do it with gladness. It's because it's something that God laid on our hearts to do as an extension of him here in the earth. We should never do it begrudgingly. We should never do it with a bad attitude, because he won't be pleased with your service. If you're just showing up because you're on the schedule, and I'm going to go ahead and go up here because I got to go because I'm on the schedule to do this and that and the other, your attitude, that negative attitude, that negative heart posture, it's going to be felt. You can only fake it for so long. And we don't want to fake it until we make it. We want to faith it. We want to do everything in great faith and great expectation that there will be a mighty move of God. That when people see us and they see the smile, when we greet them, they feel the love of the Lord. Not that we have an attitude and we don't want to be there, because that will negatively impact them. Everything should be about having a kingdom impact, having a positive influence. People have a good experience. They experience God when they see you, that they know that they have been with God because they have been in your presence, that his presence is there. And so when we're obedient and we make those sacrifices with great joy, God is pleased, and he's pleased to dwell there because he knows that what you're doing it from a pure heart. He knows that you're doing it because you desire to serve his people, that you are desiring to please him. And so we have to know that with the sacrifice, we may not like it. It may sometimes be uncomfortable, but nobody said that this life was going to be easy. God didn't promise an easy life where we could just kick back with our feet up. There are going to be some hard things. There are going to be some things that we have to give up. There's some things that we're going to have to walk away from. There are going to be some things we have to turn from. But what we are willing to turn away from and let go of, there's so much more that we can get. There's so much greater that lies ahead. But if we're not willing to make those sacrifices, if we're not willing to let go of that hurt, if we're not willing to, let go of that grudge, then we can't experience all of these other great things that God has, in store for us. So be willing to make the sacrifice. Be willing to let those things go. Be willing to sometimes be inconvenienced and be uncomfortable. It's temporary. It's not a permanent thing. It's a temporary thing. We're the ones that prolong those seasons. We're the ones that prolong the suffering because we are disobedient. We're the ones that have to pay the higher price, the additional penalties and fees because we don't want to be obedient. We want to do it our way. We want to have it our way all the time. And that's not what life is. Life is not having it your way all the time. There is sacrifice that has to be made. If it means that you have to be quiet, even though a person has hurt your feeling, even though they're trying to assassinate your character, even though they're trying to tear you down, even though they're trying to be passively, aggressively mean or petty, sometimes we just have to learn to take that higher road. We have to learn to take that higher road. Sometimes we just have to sit in silence. God is our greatest vindicator. We don't have to fight every battle. We don't always have to have the last word. Sacrifice your flesh in that moment. Sacrifice your flesh in that moment. Let God fight your battles. Yes, what that person said was wrong. Yes, it's inaccurate. Yes, it hurts your feelings. Yes, you may cry. Yes, you may be angry. Deal with it and move on. Let God deal with it. Don't let it steal your joy. Don't let it make you withhold your love from those that may need your love. Don't let it stop you from operating and flowing in your gifts. Don't let that stop what God has for you. He will deal with that situation in due season. But make the sacrifice and make it with joy. Don't complain about being uncomfortable. Jesus was uncomfortable on the cross. He was uncomfortable when they drove the nails in his hands and in his feet, when they put the crown of thorns on his head. But he had made a decision that it was not his will, but God's will be done. And so I pray that that will be your perspective and your attitude. Check out this week's episode of my podcast. It's entitled Sacrifice. Have your journal, have a pen with you, and I hope that it will change your perspective on sacrifice and that you'll do it from a place of joy. Again, you can find the podcast on Anchor and on Spotify and on on Apple Podcast as well. Remember that today is a great day to be made new, and I am always, always rooting for you. I'll talk to you guys soon. Until next time.